All right, let's go. Number 10. The Villa of the Papyri, Herculaneum in the autumn of 1752. A well digger working near the town of Resina on the Bay of Naples drove his tool through the roof of a buried room. He was not looking for manuscripts. He was looking for water. The volcanic material above him, hardened by the 79C eruption that buried Herculaneum under approximately 20 meters of pyroclastic flow, split open, and the bit dropped into a space below. When the crew excavated the opening, the space was part of a building. The building had a library, not a collection of scrolls, a library. The structure was later identified as a private villa of exceptional scale, the largest Roman country house excavated to that date, and what the 1752 crew had broken through would eventually be designated the only intact ancient library ever recovered from the classical world. The scrolls were carbonized by the Vesuvius event, compressed and blackened into cylinders resembling charred wood. 18th century excavators working under royal commission from Charles VII of Naples attempted to unroll them. Most methods destroyed the scrolls in the process. Of the approximately 1,800 extracted from the site, a significant portion were lost in the effort to read them. The remainder went into institutional collections, where they waited 2.5 centuries for a technology that did not exist. That technology now exists. In 2016, Brent Seals and his team at the University of Kentucky demonstrated that carbonized scrolls could be read through multispectral optical analysis without physical unrolling. In 2023, the Vesuvius Challenge used high-resolution CT scans to produce the first substantial passage of ancient Greek text read from an unopened scroll sealed since 79C, a discussion of pleasure in the voice of Philodemus of Gadara. 1,000 words of intact ancient philosophy decoded from what appeared, for 3 centuries, to be a piece of charred wood. The 1,900 recovered scrolls represent the outer library, a specialized subcollection focused on Philodemus and the Epicurean school sponsored by the villa's probable owner, Lucius Calpurnius Piso Caesoninus, Julius Caesar's father-in-law and consul in 58 BCE. The main reading room, the primary library the outer collection existed to supplement, has never been found. It is in the unexcavated section of the villa, under the modern town of Ercolano, built directly above the site when the 18th century excavations were backfilled and halted. Formal proposals to tunnel into the unexcavated section were submitted to the Italian Ministry of Cultural Heritage and declined on the grounds of unacceptable risk to occupied structures above. The Herculaneum Conservation Project, the collaborative effort of the Packard Humanities Institute and the British School at Rome, confirmed through geophysical survey that the unexcavated wing is physically intact beneath the town. The technology to read carbonized scrolls without opening them now works on what has been recovered. The main collection is still sealed. What makes this particular loss difficult to set aside is its precision. This is not speculation about ancient libraries destroyed by fire. This is a specific building, at a known GPS location, whose primary contents are sealed not by destruction, but by legal protection of the modern structures above them. 20 meters of volcanic rock separates the surface of Ercolano from the floor of the room where the library sits. In the dark beneath that rock, in a space that has not been touched since the afternoon Vesuvius sealed it, the primary reading collection of one of the most significant intellectual patrons of the late Roman Republic has not been disturbed in 22 centuries. If you've been getting value from this kind of deep investigation into what's actually sealed and why, the ebook in the description goes further into what the physical evidence shows. The link is below. Number 9. The sealed burial mound of Qin Shi Huang in March 1974. 3 brothers digging a well in a wheat field near Shan in Shanxi province broke through the floor of an ancient pit and pulled up a piece of terracotta the color of old clay. They recognized it as something old and contacted the local authorities. What followed was one of the most significant archaeological excavations of the 20th century, the discovery of the Terracotta Army, more than 8,000 life-sized clay soldiers, 130 chariots, 520 horses, arranged in battle formation inside a complex of sealed vaulted pits. Each figure was individually modeled with distinct facial features, equipped with real bronze weapons. Painted in vivid mineral pigments that had survived underground for more than 2,000 years. Within minutes of exposure to air, the pigments began to fade from the clay surfaces. Photographs taken at the moment of excavation show colors that are no longer there. The army is extraordinary. What it is guarding is more remarkable. The terracotta army stands 5 kilometers northeast of a large earthen mound that has never been opened. That mound is the tomb of Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of unified China, who died in 210 BC after ruling a state that standardized currency, measurement, written script, and road widths across a territory previously divided among 7 competing kingdoms. His burial was organized on a scale proportional to those ambitions. Sima Qian, court historian writing approximately 100 years after the sealing and drawing on official court records, described the tomb's interior in the records of the Grand Historian, a subterranean palace beneath a sealed dome, its ceiling mapped in bronze with constellations representing the night sky. Its floor containing a model of the Chinese Empire, with rivers of mercury flowing through mechanical channels, sealed with crossbow traps set to fire at any intruder, illuminated by lamps fueled for maximum burn duration. The construction required 700,000 workers, and the craftsmen who knew the burial chamber's internal layout were executed so that no external record of its configuration survived. The description was treated as literary amplification for most of the 20th century. Then a Chinese research team tested the soil. Duan Qingbo of Northwest University in Xi'an led the analysis. Mercury concentrations in soil samples taken from directly above the mound measured approximately 100 times the natural background level for that region. The pattern was not uniform. It was highest at the center and diminished outward in a gradient consistent with liquid mercury moving within a sealed interior space over time. Not pooled once. Moving in channels seeping upward through 2,200 years of stratified soil. Sima Qian described mercury rivers. The mercury is there. The Chinese government's position on excavation rests on 3 reinforcing constraints. The 1982 law on the protection of cultural relics prohibits excavation of imperial tombs without authorization from the State Administration of Cultural Heritage, which has not been granted. The mercury concentration constitutes a documented occupational hazard requiring industrial-scale decontamination before any soil could be opened. And the preservation problem is real and currently unresolved. Whatever organic materials exist inside have survived 22 centuries in unchanged sealed conditions, and the moment air reaches them, they enter the same conditions that began stripping the paint from the terracotta army soldiers within minutes of exposure in 1974. These constraints are genuine. What makes them distinctive is the specific evidence that surrounds them. The internal configuration of a sealed structure was described by a historian 100 years after its sealing, drawing on records that have not otherwise survived. With enough specificity that a 21st century soil chemistry survey confirmed the primary material claim. Remote sensing and magnetometry have outlined large structural features at shallower depths without reaching the burial chamber itself. The mound has a known circumference, a known height, a known position in the landscape. It has been there for 2,200 years. The prohibition sign on the approach path is the only document between it and the evidence inside. The tourist platforms are at prescribed distance. The mercury still moves in the channels Sima Qian described, in the dark beneath the mound, and the emperor who standardized China has not been disturbed in 22 centuries. Number 8. Padmanabhaswamy Temple Vault B in May 2011. The Supreme Court of India ordered the Sri Padmanabhaswamy Temple in Thiruvananthapuram, Kerala, to open its sealed underground vaults for the first time in documented institutional memory. The case had been brought by T.P. Sundararajan, a retired officer of the Indian Administrative Service, who argued that the temple's assets required proper public accounting. The Supreme Court appointed a panel to oversee the systematic opening of 6 sealed vaults labeled A through F. What the panel found, beginning with Vault A, transformed the scale of the discovery immediately and made every subsequent decision harder. Vault A contained gold statues, ceremonial objects, necklaces of emerald and pearl, golden elephants and vessels, sacks of gold and silver coins with Dutch, Roman, and Napoleonic mint markings, an 18-foot gold chain, gemstone-encrusted crowns, gold bullion in quantity, and a volume of treasure items too numerous to catalog an initial inspection. The other vaults were opened in sequence. The combined estimated value of the contents across vaults A through F ranged from $22 billion upward, depending on the valuation method applied to historical artifacts, a figure that made the Padmanabhaswamy find the largest archaeological treasure discovery in recorded modern history. The temple, dedicated to Vishnu and located in a city whose name derives from the god in his form as Padmanabha, had been accumulating tribute from kingdoms across southern India and beyond for over 1,000 years. Vault B was different from all the others, and the difference reversed the assumptions the panel had built from vaults A through F. Every other vault had a mechanical lock. A key had been cut. Vault B had no mechanical lock, no padlock, no deadbolt, no key had ever been made for it. The door was sealed by what the temple's chief priests identified as a Nagabandha, a ritual sealing performed through recitation of specific Vedic chants by priests of the Siddha Vaidya lineage, the ceremonial tradition historically assigned to Padmanabhaswamy Temple. The inscription above the door depicted 2 serpents. The priests advised the panel that forcing the door by mechanical means would release consequences proportional to the authority of the seal, and that the only appropriate opening procedure was the specific counter ceremony, performed by priests of the required lineage who had not practiced the tradition in living memory. The panel's position at this juncture was specific in a way that has no parallel in the history of modern archaeology. They had already confirmed more wealth in the adjacent vaults than most nations hold in reserve. The institutional logic that had governed the temple's finances for a millennium meant that whatever was behind Vault B, separated from the other vaults and sealed not with a physical mechanism but with a ceremony, had been treated by the priests of that tradition as something that required a level of protection exceeding what physical locks provided. The priests had not used a Nagabandha seal on Vault A. They had used it exclusively on Vault B. The panel authorized the Archaeological Survey of India to conduct a ground-penetrating radar survey of the vault before any further decision was made. The radar confirmed an interior space of approximately 15 square meters. The survey report identified what it described as metallic objects in a distributed pattern across the interior. The panel reviewed the radar data, reviewed the priestly documentation of the Nagabandha tradition, and submitted its recommendation to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court accepted the recommendation. Vault B would not be forced open. That ruling is in the public legal record of the Supreme Court of India. It was issued by justices of the world's largest democracy. Operating with physical radar evidence confirming contents inside the vault, and the context of $22 billion confirmed in adjacent rooms. The court accepted a priestly warning inscribed above a door as sufficient grounds for non-entry. The radar data is in the survey files. The adjacent vault catalog is a matter of public record. The question of what the priests sealed with a ceremony rather than a lock, in a temple that had accumulated what is now confirmed as the largest archaeological treasure hoard in recorded history, has a physical answer somewhere behind the door with serpents above it. Subsequent petitions filed since the 2011 ruling have moved through the court system without producing an order to open the vault. The Travancore royal family, which administered the temple before Indian independence, pursued parallel custody proceedings without altering Vault B's sealed status. No authority has been permitted to find it. Number 7. The Talpiot tomb in April 1980. Construction workers clearing ground for an apartment development in the Armin Hanatsev neighborhood of East Jerusalem broke through the roof of a rock-cut tomb. The workers recognized the style as ancient, the arrangement of the cut, the blocking stone at the entrance, the depth of the shaft, and contacted the Israel Department of Antiquities. The department dispatched a salvage excavation team under the direction of archaeologist Joseph Gath, who began work before the construction site was further disturbed. The tomb was a 1st century Jewish burial site of a type common in Jerusalem during the Second Temple period, approximately 30 BCE to 70 CE. The burial practice of the period used a 2-stage sequence. The body was placed on a carved shelf for primary decomposition, after which the bones were collected and placed into a limestone ossuary, a bone box, roughly the length of the femur, along with an inscribed identification. The tomb Gath opened contained 10 limestone ossuaries and the skeletal remains of at least 35 individuals distributed across the tomb's carved chambers. Several ossuaries bore inscriptions in Aramaic and Greek script of the 1st century period. The inscriptions read, Yeshua bar Yosef, Maria, Yose, Yehuda bar Yeshua, Matityahu, Mariamain Mara. In English, Jesus son of Joseph, Mary, Joseph, Judah son of Jesus, Matthew, and a second Mary, with an additional Aramaic descriptor. Gath completed the salvage excavation. The ossuaries were removed to the Israel Antiquities Authority repository in Bet Shemesh. The site was sealed. The apartment construction continued above it. Gath died in 1993 without having published the excavation report. The ossuaries sat in the repository for 16 years. In 1996, a BBC documentary referenced the find. In 2007, Simcha Jacobovici and archaeologist James Tabor brought the tomb to public attention through a film and accompanying book. The EA issued a statement describing the identification as improbable given the commonality of the names. The statement did not authorize reopening. Scholars divided sharply on the statistical question whether 6 names including Jesus son of Joseph, 2 forms of Mary, Joseph, Matthew, and Judah son of Jesus occurring together in a single 1st century Jerusalem tomb represented a statistically significant cluster or an unremarkable coincidence among common names of the period. The statistical debate has not concluded. In 2012, Rami Arav of the University of Nebraska at Omaha, working with Jacobovici, used a robotic camera arm inserted through a drill hole in the foundation of the apartment building above to document an adjacent sealed chamber that Gath's 1980 team had not entered. The camera recorded ossuaries inside the chamber, bearing inscriptions and carved imagery, including what Arav's team interpreted as a fish image and what other researchers interpreted as a vessel. The EA did not authorize excavation of either the adjacent chamber or the original tomb. Mitochondrial DNA analysis was attempted on bone residue from 2 ossuaries in the original tomb, specifically to determine whether the individual in one of the Mary-inscribed ossuaries was maternally related to the individual in the Yeshua bar Yosef ossuary. The results indicated no maternal relationship, which Jacobovici's team argued was consistent with a spousal connection, and which other researchers argued was simply consistent with 2 individuals from different family lines sharing a tomb, as was common practice. What can be stated without reference to the contested identification is the institutional sequence. A 1st century rock-cut tomb in Jerusalem, the correct city, the correct period, the correct burial style, containing an ossuary inscribed with the name Jesus son of Joseph, alongside variants of associated names, was opened in a salvage excavation whose principal archaeologist died without publishing his report. The ossuaries were cataloged 16 years later. When the site finally received formal scholarly attention, the EA declined to authorize the investigation, additional excavation of the original tomb, entry into the adjacent sealed chamber, comprehensive osteological and DNA analysis with modern protocols that would most effectively narrow the range of possible interpretations. The identification question is genuinely contested, and the scholars who find the statistical argument unpersuasive have reasons that deserve serious consideration. What this entry is about is the institutional record. The gap between what the physical evidence allows and what investigation has been conducted is not closed by noting that the identification is controversial. The identification is controversial in part because the investigation has not been completed. The tomb is sealed under a residential building. The AA's refusal to excavate is a documented institutional position. 16 meters below the floor of an apartment in Armen-Hanatsev, the question is unresolved and sealed, and the institution that controls access to it has decided not to resolve it. Number 6. The sealed doors inside the Great Pyramid on March 22, 1993. A robot built by German engineer Rudolf Gantenbrink crawled 65 meters up the southern shaft of the Queen's Chamber inside the Great Pyramid of Giza. The robot, designated Upwalt 2, was operating under a contract from the German Archaeological Institute in Cairo to survey the shaft's interior for ventilation studies. The southern shaft of the Queen's Chamber runs at approximately 39 degrees from horizontal, carved through the pyramid's limestone core in a straight line running from the chamber wall toward the exterior of the structure. The shaft is too narrow for a human body. Gantenbrink's robot was equipped with lights and a camera transmitting real-time images back down the 65-meter cable to the chamber below. At the end of the accessible shaft, the camera found a polished limestone door fitted into the shaft walls with precision. The door had 2 copper handles protruding from its surface. At the base of the door, a gap of approximately 1 centimeter allowed the camera to detect that space existed on the other side. The shaft did not end at the door. Something was behind it. Gantenbrink reported the discovery publicly. Within days, the Egyptian Supreme Council of Antiquities, headed at the time by Zahi Hawass, removed Gantenbrink from the project. The stated reason involved dispute over whether Gantenbrink had followed proper protocols for public announcement, the SCA maintaining that all findings must be reported through official channels before any public communication. Gantenbrink maintained he had properly informed the relevant parties. The specific sequence of events has never been publicly resolved to both parties' satisfaction. What is documented is that Gantenbrink did not return to the shaft. The door was not re-examined for 9 years. The institutional position during those 9 years was that the shafts in the Queen's Chamber were symbolic architectural features, ritual passages without physical access function, their terminal points decorative rather than operational. The SCA's formal guidance was that a sealed limestone feature at the end of a symbolic shaft should be interpreted as a symbolic terminus, not as a door concealing a space. That position did not survive what happened in 2002. The SCA authorized a National Geographic-funded project using iRobot's Pyramid rover, more sophisticated than Gantenbrink's Upwalt 2, to drill a small hole through the limestone door and insert a fiber optic camera into the space beyond. The drill went through the stone. The camera went in. The institutional prediction that a symbolic door would be decorative, with nothing functional behind it, did not hold. Behind the first sealed limestone door, 21 centimeters away, sat a second sealed limestone door with its own copper handles intact. In the 21 centimeter gap between the 2 doors, fine dust and 2 small copper pins that had apparently fallen from the hardware of the second door at some point in the preceding millennia. Nothing else. The space between 2 sealed limestone barriers inside a shaft through the core of the most intact ancient structure on Earth had been undisturbed since whatever was placed behind the second door was placed there. The SCA did not authorize drilling through the second door. In 2011, the JEDI Project, a collaboration between the University of Leeds and Dassault Systems, sent a more advanced robot into the shaft with a camera capable of bending around corners. The camera reached the back face of the first limestone door and found red ochre hieroglyphs painted on the back surface, builder's marks not visible from the shaft side, consistent with construction phase inscriptions found elsewhere in the pyramid. The hieroglyphs were documented but not translated in the published reports. The drill hole in the first limestone door has been there since 2002. The copper pins from the second door's hardware still lie where they came to rest in the gap between the 2 sealed limestone barriers. The second door stands with its copper handles intact. The space beyond the second door has not been examined by any instrument. Whatever is there is still there, sealed behind hardware installed approximately 4,500 years ago, behind a second door no one has drilled through, in a shaft that the Ska's current position describes as symbolic. The 2011 Jedi robot also documented that the first limestone door bears red ochre hieroglyphs on its back face. Builder's marks not visible from the shaft side. Their content has not been published in translated form in the peer-reviewed literature available to outside researchers. They are inside the pyramid, on the back of a door that has not been physically opened, 65 meters up a shaft too narrow for a human body. The evidence for that position after March 22, 1993, and after 2002, is the same as it was before, which is to say, the physical evidence no longer supports it, and has not since the moment a robot's camera looked through a 1 centimeter gap and found space on the other side. If you're not subscribed yet, now's a good time. And drop a comment below telling me which of these sealed spaces you think would change the most about what we know. I read every one. Number 5. The Nag Hammadi Cliff Cave Complex in December 1945. Near the town of Nag Hammadi in Upper Egypt, a farmer named Muhammad Ali al-Saman was working with his brothers at the base of the Jabal al-Tarif cliffs, digging for sabak, decomposed soil scraped from around ancient sites for use as agricultural fertilizer, a practice common across rural Upper Egypt. His mattock struck something hard. He dug around it and lifted up a sealed earthenware jar, approximately half a meter tall, its mouth covered with a bowl and the seal fixed with bitumen. He set the jar on the ground and did not open it immediately. The tradition in his part of Upper Egypt held that sealed jars found buried near ancient sites might contain jinn, spirits whose release would follow the breaking of the seal. Muhammad Ali described his hesitation to researchers in later years. Then he reasoned that the jar might contain gold. He raised his mattock and broke the jar open. What spilled out was papyrus. 13 leather-bound books, some pages still in their bindings, some loose, some fragmenting on contact with dry air. He gathered what he could. That evening, his mother used some of the loose papyrus pages as fuel beneath the cooking pot, because the leaves were dry and lit quickly. The remaining books moved through a chain of local dealers, a physician in Al-Qusiyah, a Coptic priest, and eventually Egyptian antiquities authorities before James M. Robinson of the Claremont Graduate School organized the first formal scholarly documentation of the provenance in 1975 and oversaw production of the English-language scholarly edition. The 13 leather-bound codices contained 52 texts in Coptic, translated from Greek originals dating to the 1st and 2nd centuries C. Among them, the Gospel of Thomas, containing 114 sayings attributed to Jesus, of which 65 have direct parallels in the canonical Gospels. The Gospel of Philip, the Gospel of Truth, the Apocryphon of John, the Secret Book of James. Some manuscript scholars have argued, based on textual analysis of underlying oral tradition, that portions of the Gospel of Thomas preserve material earlier in its formation than the written composition of Mark, which would mean the jar at the base of the Jabal al-Tarif cliff contained a textual tradition older in its underlying stratum than the oldest canonical gospel manuscript in existence. That argument is contested. The physical context of the discovery is not. The Jabal al-Tarif cliff face above the discovery site contains more than 150 rock-cut tomb chambers carved into the limestone over a period spanning from approximately the 6th dynasty of Egypt, around 2350 BC, through the Christian era. Some chambers are natural cavities that were enlarged by human cutting. Some are fully artificial. The cliff face rises steeply above the riverine plain and is visible across the valley. The chambers are visible in the limestone as dark openings at various heights. Not one of those 150-plus chambers has been subjected to a systematic modern archaeological survey. Robinson's 1975 work documented the provenance of the jarred texts. The physical cliff above where the jar was found, the tomb chambers, the surrounding landscape, any additional sealed material that might occupy comparable cavities in the rock face above and around the discovery location was not excavated. No team with ground-penetrating radar, no photogrammetric documentation of the cliff chambers, no systematic sampling protocol for additional sealed deposits. Has been published in the decades since the texts themselves were fully cataloged. The person or community that placed 13 codices in a sealed jar and buried them at the base of that cliff in approximately the 4th century C was not acting at random. Athanasius of Alexandria's festal letter of 367 C instructed monasteries across Egypt to remove texts outside the 27-book canon from circulation. Texts then being read in Egyptian Christian communities, including communities in the Nag Hammadi area. The codices in the jar were buried approximately in that period. The community that buried them knew what they contained. They sealed them carefully. They placed them in a location chosen for preservation. The jar Muhammad Ali broke open with a mattock raised for gold was not in all likelihood the only sealed deposit at the base of that cliff. The content of the recovered texts is directly relevant to what the cliff above may still hold. The Gospel of Thomas, the most extensively studied of the Nag Hammadi documents, preserves 114 sayings without narrative framing. No crucifixion, no resurrection, no biographical sequence. The sayings are presented as raw tradition attributed to Jesus, without the story the canonical Gospels built around them. Some manuscript scholars have argued this decontextualized format reflects an earlier layer, prior to the biographical framing that the Synoptic and Johannine Gospels deploy. If that argument holds, the jar did not contain a Gnostic reinterpretation of a known tradition. It contained a version of the tradition that preceded the canonical framing, whose burial in the 4th century followed Athanasius's 367 C festal letter by approximately the period needed to reach that decision. The cliff above the burial site has more than 150 chambers and has received no systematic survey. Whatever other sealed deposits, comparable jars, comparable bindings, may exist in those chambers or at comparable locations along the cliff base, placed there by communities making the same decision as the Nag Hammadi community in the same institutional moment, is an open question that archaeology has never formally pursued. A farmer who expected gold found manuscripts hidden from an institutional purge, and left 150 unexamined chambers above him in the rock on his way home. Number 4. The buried monumental structure at Petra in 2016. Sarah Parcak of the University of Alabama at Birmingham and Christopher Tuttle of the American Center of Oriental Research in Amman published their findings in the Bulletin of the American Schools of Oriental Research, the primary peer-reviewed journal for Near Eastern and Biblical Archaeology. Parcak had been awarded the TED Prize that same year for her satellite archaeology work identifying buried sites across the Mediterranean and Middle East through high-resolution commercial satellite imagery. What she and Tuttle had identified at Petra was different in scale from most buried site anomalies in the archaeological literature. The structure measures 56 meters by 49 meters at its base, roughly the footprint of a city block. A monumental staircase, 5.5 meters wide, descends from the northern edge of the structure into a platform area approximately 25 meters square. The entire structure is buried at approximately 0.5 to 1 meter below the current ground surface. Its location is 560 meters southeast of Petra's main monument complex, beyond the Colonnade Street, south of the Great Temple, in an area that has been visible to survey archaeologists and tourists for over a century of Nabatean archaeology. The satellite data was corroborated by drone surveys, which confirmed the structure's dimensions from a different imaging angle, and by ground truth work, walking the site and observing the ground-level surface signatures consistent with the buried platform's edges. The structure had appeared in no previous archaeological survey of Petra, not in the British surveys conducted from the 1920s onward, not in the Jordanian Department of Antiquities catalog, not in the accumulated Nabatean archaeology literature of the preceding 100 years of organized excavation at the site. Petra was the capital of the Nabatean kingdom from approximately the 4th century BC until 106 C, when Rome annexed the territory under Trajan. The Nabateans controlled the incense and spice trade routes connecting Arabia to the Mediterranean world, a civilization of substantial commercial sophistication that carved its monumental architecture directly into the sandstone cliffs of the Jordanian highlands. A structure of 56 by 49 meters with a 5.5-meter monumental staircase at burial depth and in Nabatean stratigraphic context, would date to the period of the kingdom's active use of the site. At those dimensions, it is not a house or a minor public facility. It is the scale of a major administrative complex, ceremonial platform, or civic structure, buried intact less than a meter below the current surface, in an area of the site where archaeologists have worked for generations. The Nabatean kingdom corresponds territorially to what the Hebrew biblical tradition called Edom. The prophetic tradition's engagement with Edom is extensive and specifically geographical. Obadiah chapter 3 addresses the inhabitants of the rock clefts, in Hebrew, Selah, the same word the Greek translators rendered as Petra, warning they will be brought down from their heights, however high they have built. Jeremiah chapter 49 delivers a sustained oracle against Edom's fortresses, its wise men, its cities. The Nabatean kingdom fell. Petra has been uninhabited for centuries. UNESCO has protected it since 1985. The buried structure at 56 by 49 meters with a monumental staircase has been sitting 560 meters from the treasury, in the soil of the most prophesied against city in the Hebrew biblical tradition, under less than a meter of sand. Parkak and Tuttle submitted excavation permit applications to the Jordan Department of Antiquities following the paper's publication. As of the paper's publication and subsequent reporting through the years since, no excavation has been authorized. The satellite confirmed it. The drone confirmed it. The peer-reviewed publication named it. The permit application is in the file. Between what is confirmed about this structure, its dimensions, location, depth, and probable Nabatean dating, and whatever is sealed in its subfloor chambers, there is less than a meter of sand and an unapproved permit. The Nabatean kingdom's relationship to the Hebrew prophetic tradition is worth establishing in detail, because the structure Parkak and Tuttle found is not generically ancient. It is specifically Nabatean, in specifically Edomite territory, in the specifically prophesied against capital city. The oracles against Edom in Obadiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel are among the most geographically specific in the Hebrew prophetic corpus. Obadiah's oracle addresses a people who build their nest in the clefts of the rock, at the heights of the eagle, a description that fits the cliff dwelling. Rock-carved capital of the Nabatean kingdom with precision that no other ancient city can match. Jeremiah chapter 49 addresses Edom's cities by name and announces that Teman will be desolate and Bozrah will become a horror. Ezekiel chapter 35 describes the mountains of Edom being made desolate and waste, with no one passing through them. These are not vague regional condemnations. They are directed at a specific architecture, a specific city plan, a specific civilization in a specific location. What a 56 by 49 meter buried structure with a monumental staircase would have contained at the height of Nabatean civilization is not a speculative question. Civic-scale buildings in Nabatean Petra served specific functions: temple precincts, administrative complexes, trading registries, royal administrative facilities. The Nabateans were meticulous administrators. Their system of water management, their trade route records, their treaty documentation suggests a civilization with organized record-keeping. What was in the archives of a major civic structure at Petra's height? What documents, what records, what administrative materials? Has no parallel in the excavated Nabatean record because no Nabatean administrative complex has been excavated at this scale. That is the entire threshold between what is known and what is not. It has been sitting there for nearly a decade. Number 3. The Cave of Machpelah Interchambers Genesis chapter 23 is not a legend. It is a real estate transaction. Abraham, standing at the gate of Hebron, negotiates with Ephron son of Zohar for the right to purchase a specific property, the field of Machpelah, the cave at its end, and all the trees within the field's boundaries. The price is fixed at 400 shekels of silver, weighed at commercial standard, in a transaction conducted at the city gate in the presence of the assembled community. The text names the buyer, it names the seller, it names the location, it names the price and the measurement system, it names the witnesses. It reads less like mythologized origin material and more like a property deed, and it has led to an unusual archaeological situation, because the site those 400 shekels purchased is not seriously doubted. Beneath the structure in Hebron now called the Cave of Machpelah, or the Ibrahimi Mosque, lies a natural cave complex that is widely accepted to be the site identified in the Genesis text. Above the cave stands the Herodian enclosure, one of the best preserved examples of Herod's construction program anywhere in the world. The enclosure walls are built of massive cut limestone blocks, some up to 7 meters in length, fitted without mortar to the same standard of precision visible at the Temple Mount retaining wall and at Masada. No other structure from Herod's building program survives at comparable completeness. The enclosure was built on this specific site, over this specific cave, at a level of engineering investment that reflects the significance Herod's court assigned to what lay beneath. Within the enclosure are cenotaphs marking the traditional burial locations of Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, Jacob and Leah. The floor of the building is a composite of Byzantine, early Islamic, Crusader, and Ottoman additions laid across the centuries. In the floor is a sealed trapdoor. The trapdoor opens to a stairway. The stairway descends to the cave. No archaeologist in the modern era has been permitted to go further. The first modern account of the inner chambers comes from 1119 C. Crusader chronicles of the period record that monks attached to the sanctuary at Hebron during the Crusader occupation broke into a sealed corridor beneath the building's floor. They found a stairway descending into a series of chambers. The accounts describe bones, inscribed stones, and structural features, indicating that the cave system extended beyond the entry point. The corridor was explored and then resealed. No scientific documentation was produced. The accounts are preserved in Crusader period chronicle material without independent corroboration from the period. In 1968, following the Israeli capture of Hebron in 1967, Moshe Dayan, serving as defense minister, arranged for a child small enough to pass through a narrow shaft identified in the building's floor to be lowered by rope into the subchamber below. The identity of the child was not published. The account was confirmed across multiple sources over the following decades. She reported, upon being pulled back up, that she had seen bones and markings on a wall surface in the space below. Dayan ordered the shaft immediately resealed. No Israeli archaeological institution was granted access to what she had described. No photographs were taken. No formal documentation was produced. The Muslim Waqf that administers the building as the Ibrahimi Mosque maintains an absolute prohibition on archaeological entry to the cave chambers beneath the floor. The Israeli government, which controls Hebron under current political arrangements, has not contested this prohibition. The sealed trapdoor remains in the floor. What makes this entry sit where it sits in this countdown is the density of the layering. The Genesis 23 text constitutes a specific, named, witnessed purchase of a specific named location. The Herodian enclosure above the cave is confirmed by architectural analysis. The cave system beneath the floor is confirmed by every account from 1119 C through the 1968 entry. The inscribed stones described by the Crusaders have not been examined by epigraphers. The bones reported in 1968 have never been dated. The extent of the cave system below the trapdoor has never been surveyed. Whether what is in the inner chambers corresponds to, contradicts, or has no bearing on the Genesis account is impossible to determine. Not because the evidence cannot in principle be examined, but because the conditions under which examination would be permitted appear structurally unavailable. The detail that the Crusader account mentions inscribed stones in the inner chambers deserves particular weight. Inscriptions in a cave system beneath a structure built over a site identified as a patriarchal burial ground would potentially represent one of two categories: dedicatory inscriptions placed there by worshippers over centuries of pilgrimage to the site, or original inscriptions associated with whatever was found in the cave when it was first discovered and developed as a sacred location. In the latter case, the language and content of those inscriptions, if they are in Hebrew, Aramaic, or Greek, and if they date to the period the Genesis text places the original purchase, would represent documentary evidence bearing on the oldest real estate transaction in the biblical record. The bones are equally significant. The Machpelah tradition names 6 individuals: Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Rebekah, Jacob, and Leah. The Genesis text places the initial burial in the patriarchal period, conventionally associated with the Bronze Age, approximately 2000-1500 BCE. A physical burial site identified this early and maintained with this continuity would represent extraordinary documentary material. The bones the 1968 shaft entry confirmed are in the inner chambers. Their dating by radiocarbon methods, which are standard and well established for material in this age range, would either confirm, contradict, or be ambiguous about the site's antiquity. No dating has been attempted. The bones have not been touched since whatever placed them there. The knowledge exists in the sealed rock. It is not impossible to find. It is impossible to be permitted to try. Number 2. The resealed tomb beneath the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in October of 2016. A restoration team from the National Technical University of Athens, led by structural restoration scientist Antonia Moropoulou, received authorization from the 6 Christian denominations that share administrative custody of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem to open the marble casing of the edicule, the small shrine inside the church that has enclosed the traditional site of the tomb of Jesus Christ since its last structural renovation in 1810. The marble had not been lifted for scientific examination in the modern era. The 6th denomination authorization was required because the church operates under the status quo, an Ottoman period arrangement formalized in 1852 that assigns specific spaces, specific corridors, and specific hours of access within the building to 6 Christian denominations: Greek Orthodox, Roman Catholic Franciscans, Armenian Apostolic, Coptic Orthodox, Ethiopian Orthodox, and Syriac Orthodox. The arrangement is specific enough to govern which denomination controls which lamp and which section of floor. Disputes over it have reached international diplomatic channels. Physical altercations among denominational representatives over assigned corridor access have been documented into the 21st century. Moropoulou's team was allocated a narrow window structured around the liturgical schedules of the 6 denominations. Their mandate was structural consolidation. The 1810 edicule fabric had deteriorated significantly and required intervention. The scientific access was a condition of the restoration work, not a standalone investigation. The edicule contains, at its center, the burial chamber, a space roughly 2 meters wide and 2 meters deep, its floor covered by marble installed during the 1555 renovation. Centered on the floor, positioned above the space identified by the Constantinian tradition as the burial bench of the original rock-cut tomb, was a second marble slab added during the 1808 Greek Orthodox renovation. The team lifted the upper slab. Beneath it was a lower layer of gray marble from the 1555 period. The team lifted that layer as well. Beneath both marble coverings, exposed for the first time in at least 460 years, was the original limestone surface, the rock-cut burial bench of a 1st century CE Jewish tomb, carved in the style characteristic of Jerusalem's Second Temple period rock-cut tombs. The bench was intact. The limestone was undisturbed. The team collected mortar samples from the interface between the Byzantine period masonry and the limestone surface, documented the exposed bench in full photogrammetric survey, and completed their measurements before the access window closed and the marble was replaced. Their findings were published in Scientific Reports in 2020. Moropoulou's team confirmed that Byzantine period mortar deposits lay directly above the original limestone surface, consistent with the Constantinian shrine construction of the 4th century CE having been placed directly on the original 1st century rock. The deposit sequence matches what the historical documentation of the site describes. The 6 denominations resealed the edicule when the window closed. The limestone bench is there. It is confirmed by direct physical measurement. It exists in a peer-reviewed publication. The restoration team from Athens opened the marble, saw the rock, and closed it again. The rock has not been touched since. What Meropolis team could not investigate was the surrounding structure. The natural limestone cliff in which the original tomb was carved is visible in sections of the church's interior, rising through later masonry in places where Constantine's engineers incorporated it into the building fabric. The Constantinian construction of 325 C, directed according to the historian Eusebius by Helena, at the location of an identified tomb, required first removing a temple of Venus Hadrian had built over the site in 135 CE, according to Eusebius, explicitly over the identified location. The removal of the Hadrianic temple exposed a rock-cut tomb in a limestone cliff. The Anastasis Rotunda enclosed it. The floor of the structure that became the Church of the Holy Sepulchre was laid across the surrounding bedrock and whatever first-century stratigraphy existed in the cliff face around the original tomb. The floor has never been archaeologically excavated. The extent of the original rock-cut tomb complex, how many chambers the cliff contained before the 4th century enclosure, what was carved into the adjacent rock face, what Constantine's engineers found and sealed under marble and mortar in 325 C, is unknown by any direct physical examination. Whatever the tomb complex looked like before the marble arrived is a question sealed in the bedrock of a building where 6 denominations dispute the right to mop their assigned corridors. The Constantinian project of 325 C required first removing a temple of Venus Hadrian had built over the site in 135 C, explicitly, according to Eusebius, over the identified tomb location. What Constantine's engineers found in the surrounding cliff face and what they enclosed or sealed beneath the floor of the Anastasis Rotunda they built has not been examined by any scientific method since. The phrase the tomb complex is the critical one. First-century Jerusalem's rock-cut tomb practice placed multiple chambers in the same limestone cliff. A family tomb would contain multiple niches and shafts for generations of burials. Constantine's engineers did not find a single isolated tomb in an empty field. They found a rock-cut chamber in a cliff face that was part of an active 1st century C necropolis. What other chambers were in that cliff, what was adjacent to the tomb Constantine's engineers identified and enclosed, what the full 1st century layout of the site looked like before the Constantinian marble arrived, none of this has been examined by any scientific method since 325 CE. The limestone bench confirmed in 2016 is still there, exactly where it was when the marble was placed over it. It was there before the Crusaders arrived and installed their additions. It was there before the Constantinian marble. It was there before Hadrian's temple was built above it. The rock does not change. The 6 denominations sealed it again in 2016. And whatever the surrounding cliff contains is sealed in the floor beneath a church that has permitted direct scientific access to the tomb surface exactly once in the modern era. Number 1. The sealed excavation prohibition under the Temple Mount between 1867 and 1870. A British Royal Engineers officer named Charles Warren, working under commission from the Palestine Exploration Fund, conducted the most comprehensive underground survey of Jerusalem ever completed. Warren sank vertical shafts at the exterior of the Temple Mount walls, some reaching depths of 27 meters, crawled through water channels cut into the bedrock, measured cisterns and corridor widths by lamplight, and mapped the subterranean structure with compass and tape measure. Frequently working against the active objection of Ottoman authorities who periodically forced him to abandon his tunnels and fill in his shafts before reopening them at night. He documented everything in underground Jerusalem, published in 1876. What Warren mapped was a system of more than 35 cisterns and connecting passages carved into the bedrock beneath the Temple Mount platform. Water channels, storage vaults, sealed corridors. Working through a network of bedrock channels at depth, he found a passage running horizontally in the direction of the foundation stone. The natural limestone outcrop at the center of the Dome of the Rock, which is the highest point of the Temple Mount's bedrock surface, and which Jewish tradition identifies as the location of the Holy of Holies in Solomon's Temple. Warren found the passage sealed on the side facing the foundation stone. He marked it on his published map, noted that it ran toward the rock, and could not proceed. No investigator since Warren has reached that passage. Warren's surveys have not been repeated in the 157 years since he completed them. Following June 1967, when Israeli military forces captured East Jerusalem, administrative control of the Temple Mount surface was assigned by the Israeli government to the Islamic Waqf, the religious trust responsible for the Haram al-Sharif. The Waqf is maintained as an absolute and non-negotiable condition of its administration that no archaeological excavation of any kind may be conducted beneath the Temple Mount surface. This position has not varied across any Israeli government since 1967, under any international diplomatic framework or negotiated arrangement. No institution with jurisdiction over the surface has challenged it. The 1996 events provide calibration for why. Israeli authorities opened a pedestrian passage running along the northern exterior edge of the western wall for public access. The tunnel ran entirely along the outside of the Herodian retaining wall, below the street level of the adjacent Muslim quarter, but at no point beneath the Temple Mount platform surface itself. It was an exterior wall corridor, visible to external survey, touching nothing beneath the platform. Its opening triggered riots across the West Bank and Gaza, in which dozens of people were killed. The institutional response to a tunnel that ran along the outside of the wall and never passed beneath the platform gives a precise measure of what opening a tunnel that did pass beneath the platform would produce. In 2007, the Waqf undertook construction in the Solomon Stables area of the platform, operating heavy machinery through unexcavated layers without archaeological supervision. Israeli courts were petitioned. The ruling confirmed the damage was archaeologically irreversible, but provided no enforcement mechanism against Waqf authority on the platform surface. The material displaced by the machinery was dumped in the Kidron Valley as fill. Gabi Barkay and Zaki Devira organized the Temple Mount sifting project to recover from that fill what could be recovered. Systematic sifting and analysis of approximately 400 tons of material confirmed the presence of First Temple period artifacts, pottery, stamp seals, architectural elements, from strata that had existed in sealed layers beneath the platform surface until the machinery removed them. Those strata no longer exist below the platform. Whatever occupied the layers above them is deeper, undisturbed, and still sealed. Lean Rittmeyer's 2006 publication, The Quest, presented a detailed architectural reconstruction of the Temple Mount's development from the Iron Age through the Herodian period, drawing on Warren's surveys, Mishnaic and Talmudic source material, describing the temple's interior dimensions, and direct measurement of the foundation stone's current surface. In the course of that work, Rittmeyer identified a rectangular depression cut into the upper surface of the foundation stone, a feature visible in the rock, previously unremarked in the published literature. The depression measures approximately 55 centimeters wide by 90 centimeters in length, cut to consistent depth. The dimensions correspond, within the margin of ancient Near Eastern measurement systems, to the dimensions given in the biblical text for the base of the Ark of the Covenant, the acacia wood chest overlaid with gold, described in Exodus chapters 25 and 37, that rested in the Holy of Holies of Solomon's temple and is unaccounted for in any physical record after the Babylonian destruction of 586. Beasts. The depression is in the foundation stone. It is there, in the rock, visible to anyone with access to the interior of the Dome of the Rock. Warren's sealed passage is documented in his 1876 map, running through the bedrock toward the foundation stone from below. Rittmeyer's depression is in the surface of that rock above it. Between them, from below and above, two independently documented physical features point at the same location in the most excavation-restricted site in biblical archaeology. This site is not sealed by institutional caution or legal complexity or preservation concern, though all three arguments have been made. It is sealed by a political arrangement that no government with jurisdiction over it will revise, because the consequences of revising it, as a 1996 riot over an exterior wall corridor demonstrated, are not archaeological. The Temple Mount Sifting Project confirmed specific categories of material in the dumped debris: pottery from the First Temple period, stamp seals. Worked stone consistent with monumental construction. The strata that contain those materials no longer exist below the platform. The machinery removed them. What remains in the undisturbed sealed layers is older, deeper, and uncontaminated by the extraction that destroyed the shallower record. Warren's passage runs toward the foundation stone. Rittmeyer's cutting sits in the surface of the rock above it. The prohibition has held for 57 years. It is not scheduled to change. If you want to see more videos like this, click the video on screen now and make sure to subscribe.